up, Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good morning, everybody, wherever you are in this world. We have a lot to go through today. I'm very, very happy that I'm going to soon be joined by a couple of great collaborators. Gordon, obviously, is going to be jumping on right now. Here he is. Hey,
by the skin of my teeth.
Yeah. All right, classy. This is like an Indiana Jones maneuver rolling right under the closing door. That was great.
That's right.
How you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you? Excited about this?
Yeah.
We should be getting a big crowd from Daily because I was filling in for Ash today and was hyping this. So I think Brian said he's going to come over and should have a lot of those peeps in the chat. So
that's fun. All right, cool. I'm looking forward to this too. Obviously, I think everyone kind of has a sense if they've watched last week's show, if they've just watched Badlands Daily, that we're our special guest today. I'll give a little sneak peek. Is Cynthia Chung, my wife and brilliant collaborator. Cynthia, how you doing?
Really good. Glad to be here.
All right, that was
good to see you again.
Likewise.
So we're gonna have some fun stuff to talk about. But before we do any of that, because it's going to deal with Iran and some exceptional research that you did some time ago in the form of a trilogy of essays that really, I think, help clarify a lot of the enigmas and confusion that people feel about what is Iran, what is going on, what are the foreign manipulations that Iran has suffered from that continue to exert influence even in today's world. So we're going to go through a lot of that. But before we do any of that stuff, we're going to have a word from today's main sponsor. So I'm going to take you off, and then we're going to listen to a word from Goldco, and then we'll jump right into some big ideas. All right, Goldco, here we are. Have you heard about President Trump's impact on gold? Every time Trump's name surges in the headlines, gold goes with it. It happened the day he took office, and it's still going up. Gold doesn't just like Trump, it rallies around him. If you bought gold the day he became president, you would be up almost $400 an ounce by now. Here's the thing. Gold has been used as a store of value for centuries. The government can't easily manipulate it, and it's known as a hedge against market risk and inflation. How high will the price of gold go under Trump's second term? Will gold continue to break record after record in 2025 and beyond? Learn about an IRS loophole that allows you to diversify your savings with gold and silver tax and penalty-free, with a free copy of gold and silver kit sent directly to your doorstep. Plus, you could qualify for up to 10% instant match in bonus silver. Visit badlandsgold.com to learn how you can add gold to your portfolio. That's badlandsgold.com. All right. So here, let's bring Cynthia back there. So yeah, Gordon, we were just watching the interviews that Tucker had done. First with Scott Horton. We watched most of it, not the whole 2.5 hours, but we watched a good chunk of it. And of course, the shorter but very, very potent conversation that he had with Iran's president, Mahmoud Pezeshkian, which just aired a few days ago, and very strategic. I mean, it's not very often that a Western audience gets to listen to the words uncensored from foreign diplomats, foreign leaders, especially from countries that we're supposed to, give our 2 minutes of hate and fear to every day, like Iran. Tucker had earlier done something useful in a similar way when he interviewed Putin. And that really was useful in terms of getting people to think about these leaders of authoritarian, evil nations as human beings. I would like it. I wish he had the capability of doing this with Xi Jinping, but that's not his assignment. His assignment, unfortunately, I think involves trying to demonize Xi Jinping in China to try to continue re-emphasize our 2 minutes of hate and fear instead of focusing on Iran and Russia, to refocus all of that intensity onto China. That's part of his thing. But still, it's still useful what he did, no doubt. And I think it opened up the door to a lot of other deeper questions that people now have about what is Iran. Hence the question of like what Cynthia has done is really good. And so Cynthia, thank you for joining us today. And Ghost, I don't know if there's any opening remarks that you'd like to throw out there before we launch into probing Cynthia's brain and her articles.
No, I'm super excited about this. This is something I've been looking forward to, and obviously it's very timely with everything, like you said, that's come out. The Scott Horton interview, I've only gotten halfway through the Pezeshkian one with Tucker, which is great, like you said, very potent. The Horton one, I've listened like the first half twice, and the second half I've listened to like 3/4 of it. It's very similar to what we do. It's like an autistic rant about the history of Iran, and I feel like it's very friendly to the regime, like in terms of not just like chalking everything up to like a cult or CIA conspiracy level stuff, but at the same time it's still very damning to like how at the very least grossly incompetent they are, but obviously there's a lot of malice too. So I think that there were a lot of good nuggets of contradiction for people like Israel sending weapons to Iran up through the 90s, like us backing the Ayatollah in the 80s against Iraq, just us playing both sides all the time. And then like when one side gets too heavily favored, we just swing our support to the other side just to keep them all killing each other. So
yeah, that's a mind blower for I think a lot of people to encounter the fact that we have been not only supporting both the Ayatollah. First, we were obviously supporting the Shah. Simultaneously, something within the U.S. and the Israeli intelligence service began to support also the Ayatollah, that continued to support Iran as well as Iraq during the time of the Iran-Iraq war. So we're supporting both sides with, again, the help of Israel. There's so many points of confusion that you really can't even begin to approach if you don't have a historical backdrop in just appreciating how global imperial powers have been manipulating that entire region for a very long time. Additionally, I would just say too, the healthier paradigm that we now see as well. I'll just remind people to keep it focused that we're going to go through a lot of history, but it's going to be to focus upon understanding the present and the future. The current positive paradigms that we've seen shaping Iran deals with Iran's strategic role within the Belt and Road Initiative, the New Silk Road. Of course, there's Tehran right there as a core artery, since this was announced for the first time in 2013 by China, and has 136 different nations around the world that have signed on. This is the vitality of the BRICS, of the multipolar alliance. Anything that makes that a viable oppositional organizational entity, which is outside of the influence of the City of London and Wall Street sort of cartel, has everything to do with this type of vision that we've seen emerge. And again, Tehran plays several key roles within the Belt and Road Initiative, building up new cities, massive, 30, 40 year projects for the future that are high tech, frontier, cutting edge, and that stretch all the way from Rotterdam, through Europe, through Russia, all the way to China. Again, Tehran is key. You also have the international north-south transportation corridor that involves Iran, which is complementary to the Belt and Road Initiative, that kind of unifies all of these various civilizational forces around a common humanity, a common vision that brings us all together as a species. So these are all things that the followers of Zbigniew Brzezinski, of the neocons, have been desperately trying to destroy, because they need to keep us in a state of divide to conquer, keep everybody not united or working together, but always suspicious, in fear of the other, and in constant state of war and terror. So, Cynthia, in your presentations that you delivered in the form of your amazing trilogy, which, I mean, you've done a lot of work, and this is for those who don't know, I'd like people to go right now to Cynthia's Substack, Through a Glass Darkly. It's cynthiachung.substack.com, and subscribe. And there's a lot of amazing articles on here. I mean, just glancing through it, you got Aleister Crowley, Huxley, the origins of the counterculture movement, so many things going on here, American history, the Haitian Revolution. But the thing we're going to focus on here is Iran's century-and-a-half fight for sovereignty, featuring Dr. Mossadegh right there on the front. But you don't begin with Mossadegh and the CIA overthrow, MI6 CIA overthrow of Mossadegh in the 50s. You start by going down to 1872 and the British infiltration or takeover of Iran back already in the 19th century. So I was hoping you could sort of take us through a bit of a journey of like why did you start at that place, and how did that have relevance over the ensuing 100 or so years of history in the region?
Yeah. Again, thanks so much for having me on. It's such a pleasure, and I'm a big fan of your show. You and Gordon are superb. And
You
yeah,
have to say that.
no, I don't. I don't have to say that.
I shouldn't have to say that, but we appreciate it.
Like you guys are so great. Like, I think I've already said this before, but you should, like, have a professional, platform like on television or something. I think that, it's a really great show. But my series focuses more on the question of oil, and then later on, like, what was around the revolution around Khomeini. But oil is obviously a well-known topic for creating geopolitical instability in the Middle East. Back when there was this push under the Bush administration to invade Iraq, when Americans still were pushing back a lot more on this sort of policy, there were huge protests in the street over this. And, oil was a big topic of like, we don't want to invade Iraq for its oil. So there was this understanding, but on a kind of simplistic level, that it was about oil. And most certainly it is. Like Saudi Arabia, Iran, they're the biggest oil providers in the Middle East. Together they make up, the majority. But the question about oil that people tend to miss is that it is the right to oil is also the right to a nation to govern itself. So obviously, the rights to processing and refining have been a battle as well. It's to keep countries in the most basic level of trade, which reduces them to a more controlled, entity, basically a colonial status. And as we're going to see through this series, there were also denials of them, receiving higher technologies, to again just keep them as at the most base level of living. And so people have to understand that the conflicts that happen in the Middle East, which are very much around Sykes-Picot as well, which I'll talk a little bit about. But Britain and France went into the Middle East and largely did carve up the Middle East and decide on certain boundary conditions of how countries were going to exist. Kind of similar in Africa as well. These were not boundaries that were decided by the people who were living in the region. And also a lot of what was going on in Iran that I'm going to go through quickly in terms of the beginnings of how the British were kind of taking over Iran's oil. This was also happening during the British occupation of Palestine, which was done behind the backs of the French, because the French also wanted Palestine. So this question of oil is much larger than just for greedy corporate profits. It was always an imperialistic modality that would clearly benefit, their military and their country and so forth. But it was ultimately to keep the people down. Saudi Arabia has been able to organize a bit more sovereignty, but even Saudi Arabia recognizes that they're in a very, dangerous position, and they want to diversify, because you don't want to be stuck just being, a raw materials producer for one thing. It's very easy for things to be sabotaged for you. You don't have a stable economic situation. So yeah, it started in 1872 at the time. So they had a Shah that was Nasir al-Din, and he, for whatever reason, decided to grant to the British Baron Julius de Ruyter the rights to Iran's entire economic estate. And this Reuter is a relative of what is now the Reuters news agency.
Wow.
And
really?
So,
oh, wow. Okay.
So this Baron Julius de Ruyter somehow was able to convince the Shah that he would control all of Iran's industry, farming, and rail transportation. And he set up a national bank, the Imperial Bank of Persia, which was under direct British control. In 1901, the following Shah negotiated with Darcy, the Darcy contract, which was granted to William Knox Darcy, a millionaire London socialite. And this is what he's the one who found the oil field in 1908. And this is what started the British company, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, otherwise known as APOC, or I'll just call it APOC. I don't know if that was immediately set up.
I think that's right. Yeah.
That's good. Okay. And then 6 years later, it was under Churchill that 51% of this company was purchased, which effectively nationalized the company. And this was a huge portion of a free flow of oil to the British Navy. And the Iran was only receiving about 16% of the royalties on this. So this was happening in 1908. And just to remind people that Sykes-Picot was happening by the time of 1919, when the Anglo-Persian Agreement was signed, London effectively turning Iran into a de facto protectorate run by British advisors. So there's a whole like carving up of the Middle East. And you can really argue that a lot of the problems, like Israel wouldn't have existed without the British first going into Palestine, creating the British Mandate of Palestine. And then it's a British known fascist prime minister who's the one who creates this British Mandate for Palestine.
Yeah.
And it's all under like the League of Nations construct as well, which just quickly was a vision for certain empires, British Empire obviously being the main one. The Habsburg Empire would play a role. They had a certain idea of a particular Russian Empire, Japanese Empire, American Empire, and the Middle East and Africa were largely viewed as satrapies, basically large plantations to this vision. They would be the breadbasket, slave labor to these empires. So Israel created.
And I just want to add one thing just quickly too. Like, this is often treated as two separate things, and I think what you did, because a lot of people know about Sykes-Picot, they're aware of the creation of the British Mandate Palestine. They don't think about how that's related to the League of Nations of 1919, although it's all happening at the same time by the same people, which is right. They compartmentalize, and they don't think about how that's related to what you talk about in your essay and what you're talking about now of this 1919 Anglo-Persian Agreement. That the British are organizing the entire time to basically make like Iran a British protectorate, right? After they're dismantling the Ottoman Empire. So it's like, this is one thing. You got to think like the enemy. The enemy thinks about all of these things as one thing with different aspects, and they only get dupes to think about them as separate things, as as many of us have been subjected to a lot of mainstream school conditioning. So I really appreciate that you're just tying it all together as one operation. Yeah,
like France had through. I didn't know if you wanted to say something else. France had a lot of involvement with Lebanon through the Sykes-Picot, because they have a certain idea of their historical relevancy there. But it was largely Britain who had like huge role in the starting up of Saudi Arabia, who's also a relatively new country. There was a lot of British influence in all of this. And, later on, we're going to see that Iran has largely been a product up until the last Shah of British influence, and even the security, the intelligence, the Savak of Iran under the last Shah was pretty much an MI6, Mossad, and CIA was coming in as well at a certain point. So that I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but that's important for people to keep in mind, that Iran was very much under a British kind of mandate up until the Iranian Revolution under Khomeini, which, as you guys have also mentioned, Khomeini actually was working with Israel at least during the first few years and with the war with Iraq. So again, it's showcasing that there is definitely this thing behind the scenes that is actually largely pushing directions. There's a lot of funding and a lot of weapons trafficking that's going on to support these things that are still like an Anglo-American backdrop. So during all of this, Iran was not actually receiving any of the oil from the Anglo-Persian oil company. They had to import it from the Soviet Union. And
that's insane.
Yeah.
In 1932, Reza Shah had announced that he was going to cancel this British concession to the oil company, and obviously this was not going to go without a bit of a pushback. So both Britain and the Soviet Union entered Iran over this. This is also overlapping with World War II at this point. And so Iran was occupied by both of those forces. Roosevelt was able to, Reza Shah was also exiled, and Mohammad Reza Shah, his son, became Shah. So that's the Shah that we now know. That was the last Shah before the Iranian.
And why did they go in? Why did the Soviets and the British go in 1941 into Iran? Like, what excuse did they give to go and occupy Iran?
Well, the Reza Shah had also said publicly support for Hitler, and that was a thing that was going on. The Mufti of Jerusalem, which is a whole other story, but just to briefly say like Britain was in Egypt. They had installed King Farouk, I think. But anyway, they had installed the King of Egypt. They had also installed the Mufti in Egypt. They had installed the Mufti of Jerusalem. So that was a position that didn't even exist. Like the British created that position, and this guy was totally a puppet of the British. He later on has support for Hitler, and he actually goes to Germany at one point, and he has a radio station, but he was largely trying to move the Muslim population towards support of Hitler. And to this day, there's, I think, a lot of confusion that they viewed that Hitler was going to come and liberate them from British colonialism. But the irony was the whole time the Mufti of Jerusalem was actually backed by the British. And I have a chapter on that from my book, which goes through that in detail. But anyway, so the Reza Shah was saying that he thought, but he wasn't the only one. It was kind of like something that was somewhat popular in Iraq too. There was like a kind of support for this idea. So he said publicly that he was in support of Hitler, and that was the excuse for Britain and Russia to come in and occupy him because he was considered a threat, and he had this massive, oil, resource for him that was obviously very important for military endeavors. And so he was exiled, and then his son Mohammad Reza Shah came in. And the occupation of Britain and Russia was ended through Roosevelt's Iran Declaration, which was able to organize a sort of sovereignty for Iran. Obviously not a full sovereignty, at least it ended the occupation, but obviously British intelligence played a very large role. Again, the SAVAK was pretty much a British intelligence creation. The Soviets also had a presence.
And for those who don't know, can you say what the SAVAK was for people who may not know?
Well, it was just their kind of their intelligence agency, and
like the CIA of Iran.
Yeah, you could say. And obviously
secret police kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and the Shah was foolish. He had his problems, a lot of problems. He lived like a Disney prince when everyone was super poor in Iran. So that was not a good look, obviously. But he did seem to genuinely move towards sovereignty for Iran in terms, and wanted to uplift it. but he was very naive and he trusted all the wrong people. So he trusted the Savak completely, and he trusted Henry Kissinger, and so he didn't have great judgment on the sort of thing. But anyway, so the Iran Declaration is able to at least end the occupation, but Iran is still under this kind of control with the Savak. I don't actually know exactly when the
No, I just want to quickly. I just pulled up a picture. I don't want to deflect you away, but just to make that visceral for people. This is the Shah, as he would like to be seen, and as he was as he was seen a lot.
Yeah.
In a time of total poverty in Iran, that's the sort of thing he felt comfortable walking around in. So
yeah. And real quick, because this is all very, very potent, the information you're sharing. I just want to connect a few dots for the Badlands audience that's listening. What you said in the beginning is so profound about energy and about oil, because really what you're talking about energy, and the ability to control your own energy is the essence of sovereignty. And a lot of the people who talk about Bitcoin try to equate money and the idea of currency with energy, and it's a representation of your energy that you invest with your time, and then you are rewarded with this energy that you can then spend to buy back other time by outsourcing other activities or services to other people. So being able to control your own energy resources is the essence of being a sovereign nation. And you made a great point about how Saudi Arabia and others are had all their eggs in one basket. Because if we pivot out of like an oil combustion engine era and into some other technology, the nuclear age, the golden age, whatever, they could find themselves in dire straits, which is one of the reasons they've tried to diversify their economy. I did have a question about 1914, 1908. Darcy's given the rights to the oil. And then 1914, when Churchill creates or uses the funds from the British government to purchase 51% of the company, is that when they became known as British Petroleum, or did that come later that they changed the name from APOC to British Petroleum?
Yeah, actually, I don't know when the name officially changed, but it effectively became British Petroleum because it became nationalized, because Churchill bought like 51%. So it became, under the British government's control at that point.
Okay.
So you could say that definitely by 1914, it was officially the crown.
Well, yeah. I got a little Wikipedia. I just pulled it up while you guys are talking. So the official name of British Petroleum itself Limited, it says originated in 1954. Before that, it was the So the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company that Cynthia writes about and was talking about was set up exactly at that 1909 period, when the British took 51% under the Darcy contract, and then it kept that name, until the nationalization, and then they created British Petroleum Limited after that. So, and then it changed to BP today.
But the same entity, just so people understand, she's talking about British Petroleum.
Right.
It's the same company,
right.
And this is when the Ottoman Empire still exists, long before APEC, long before Saudi Arabia, long before these, like the Middle East as we now know it even exists. You have British Petroleum in Iran, and the main reason being the oil belt that runs under the Persian Gulf is primarily in southwestern Iran. Like that's where a lot of the oil is.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a very good point. And I think that they changed their name actually for, because they were getting a bad rap. And so they changed the name. We're going to also see later on that there is evidence that the BBC and BP Petroleum were like also involved in fomenting the revolution under Khomeini. So again, just indications that this was unfortunate. Not to disregard totally what happened after the Iranian Revolution, because obviously, Iran today is not a British puppet. But we're going to go over that there was a lot of British American backing around that and explain that shortly. So in the late 1940s, Mossadegh comes into the picture, and this is where it becomes, I think, really damning of what the British and the Americans were involved in, derailing for a country that would have been in a much better place today if they had allowed Mossadegh to stay as the the prime minister of Iran, and instead they organized a coup against them. So what was Mossadegh's crime that he had to be removed? You know, there's always this talk about regime change needs to happen because this person is, for whatever reason, a security threat, or is like threatening the sovereignty of people. His campaign was around nationalizing the Anglo-Iranian oil company, and the people of Iran were obviously in accord. They were living in abject poverty. They were not receiving anything. They were not even receiving like any of the oil, as we were discussing. So he starts a committee to study the British supplemental agreement that had been put in place in 1949, which again was, they were agreeing to pay a little bit more royalties on to Iran, but there was still absolutely no control that Iran had over the oil. So Mossadegh studied law in Switzerland, so he was a lawyer, and he studied this British supplemental agreement. And a year later, this committee voted no to the British proposition. Of course, the British are like, what the hell? You created a committee and you voted on it? Like, we told you this and you should just, go along with it, is the kind of attitude they have. In 1951, they nationalized the Anglo-Iranian oil company, and it became the National Iranian Oil Company. And then less than 2 months later, Mossadegh becomes prime minister on April 20th, 1951. So the British tried to argue their case in the international courts in the year of 1951. It was at The Hague in October, and at the UN Security Council. And both attempts lost to Mossadegh's defense. And again, he studied law in Switzerland, so he was very good at arguing his case.
Good for him.
They had won their case in court. They had done everything correctly as to how we would regard a country. I mean, obviously, a country shouldn't have to argue for its rights to control its own oil, but nonetheless, they won. And Mossadegh had said at the UN Security Council, I'll just quote him, "My countrymen lack the bare necessities of existence. Our greatest natural asset is oil. This should be the source of work and food for the population of Iran. Its exploitation should probably be our national industry, and the revenue from it should go to improve our conditions of life. As now organized, however, the petroleum industry has contributed practically nothing to the well-being of the people or to the technical progress or industrial development of my country. If we are to tolerate a situation in which the Iranian plays the part of a mere manual worker in the oil fields, and if foreign exploiters continue to appropriate practically all of the income, then our people will remain forever in a state of poverty and misery. These are the reasons that have prompted the Iranian parliament to vote unanimously in favor of nationalizing the oil industry." So again, just furthering the point that Gordon was making of how important energy and controlling your ability to provide energy for your people is exactly directly related to the standard of living and the future, what kind of options you have for your future. So the British
very relevant, by the way. This afternoon, Donald Trump is hosting African leaders at the White House to discuss control of their natural resources, and that was a big part of the peace treaty he negotiated between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. And so, what Cynthia is talking about right now, from 100 years ago or 70 years ago, is playing out right now in real time in Africa. And whether the natural resources, the trillions and trillions, tens of trillions of dollars worth of natural resources in Africa should belong to the African people, or should they belong to these oligarchs who captured them 100 years ago?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, Africa has also been targeted with like capital flight and, you know, all types of like literal stealing of from the IMF and the World Bank and so forth. So anyway, so Mossadegh ends up breaking up relations with Britain because they're not recognizing this. Mossadegh reportedly had said of the British, "You do not know how crafty they are. You do not know how evil they are. You do not know how they sully everything they touch." And this is obviously from the British Empire standpoint, not the British people. The institution of the, you know, the British East India Company, these types of institutions is what he's talking about, which were so heavy-handed in these countries that they wanted to keep as colonies. So there's an orchestration of a coup by 1952 led by the MI6. President Truman okays the American involvement in this, unfortunately, through the NSC 136. Where he agreed to promote direct intervention in Iran through covert operations and even military force. Again, think about the reason for the 12 days before Eisenhower was inaugurated. You know, these types of CIA orchestrations always happen a few days before the next president, because the next president is just stuck with the mess. Like it happened with Eisenhower as well, a few weeks before Kennedy was going to become president. They had the whole Bay of Pigs thing planned out that Eisenhower never actually signed up for that project. No president signed up. It happened in the interim. So the Dulles brothers were involved, of course, in this plot as well. With Foster Dulles was, you know, the Secretary of State under Eisenhower, and Allen was the, you know, pretty much the godfather of the CIA. So you have MI6 that has a meeting with also Kermit Roosevelt, and they, you know, they basically have this plan called TP Ajax, which, you know, the New York Times has also published something on it. There was also another plan as well that was going to have black propaganda aimed at discrediting Mossadegh, claiming he was favor of the Tudeh Party, which was the Soviet Union influence in Iran. So again, a very old playbook that has been recycled.
That really struck me, like that TPA Ajax that grew out of this whole like NSC 136 plan that you write about is exactly the model used by color revolutions, the National Endowment for Democracy, the CIA. Like that's the exact same model of trying to manipulate the site, like the perceptions, both targeting political opposition forces within Iran, but then also targeting the mass population with propaganda that then gets them to do mass protests, to give off the perception to the international community that the people don't want their government. And it might be just a small subsection of maybe, you know, 1-2% of the population that actually goes out onto the streets to protest. But then you organize your BBC, you organize your media to try to amplify these tiny little crowds as if they represent 98% of the people, right? And then you try to turn a consensus opinion internationally around the idea that, yeah, maybe we do have to promote regime change for the sake of democracy, right? To stop an authoritarian government. And it's like the exact same model that people think is a new thing. And no, it's like, this is exactly what they did to destabilize and overthrow Mossadegh. It wasn't just a direct regime change from an iron fist standpoint.
Yeah, and I'll go through this coup story very quickly. Again, people can read about it more on my Substack, because I do really want to get into the oil debacle with the Shah and the Iranian Revolution. So Mossadegh ends up finding out about this plan that Fazlollah Zahedi was going to be chosen to replace him, and he ends up arresting him, but and it looks like everything is, done. The coup failed, but Kermit Roosevelt, said that he was going to wait a few days and try again. And they apparently were able to get Mossadegh after a few days. And basically, Mossadegh was so popular that they had to keep him under house arrest. And when he died, they quietly buried him under the floorboards of his house, so that people weren't even notified. They didn't want people to visit his gravesite to commemorate him. So, I mean, that's how important Mossadegh was to people. When he was found guilty, so what he was found guilty to justify his house arrest was that he had been organizing the Iranian military against the Shah. But the Shah was a puppet and had betrayed his people. And again, Mossadegh's crime was to nationalize the Iranian oil, and his military organization, which arrested this Zahedi puppet and so forth, was in defense of the country. He was the prime minister of Iran. So his response to the kangaroo court proceedings was, "My only crime is that I nationalized the oil industry and removed from this land the network of colonialism and the political and economic influence of the greatest empire, the British Empire on earth."
Yeah, I'll just say based on what Scott Horton, we enjoyed. Cynthia and I sat down and watched Scott Horton's, the first hour of it last night, and we enjoyed it. But the thing that caught us was that he was putting forth the idea, and this is one of the few disputes we took offense of. He put forth the idea that Mossadegh didn't really want to nationalize the oil. He just wanted a bigger cut of profit. And so he actually said that twice. And then when you actually look at what Mossadegh did and what he said, based on like a direct quote that Cynthia said, it was specifically to nationalize it. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that Scott is a nice guy, but he's also the president of the Libertarian Institute. And as such, ideologically, as an Austrian school libertarian, he cannot admit that the nation state can play a positive role in anything. So because of that, it's only about profit motive at the end of the day that causes things to happen. And so there's these little things that people have to just watch out for psychologically in the narrative and how he's processing information and feeding it. Because there's these ideological blind spots that he doesn't mean to throw people off, but it's part of the ideology. So I just wanted to throw that out there because it was just so clear that the idea was to nationalize the oil and use the power of the nation state to get it done.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we're gonna skip ahead. So the Shah was, he had not a great relationship with Mossadegh. He had sent him into exile, as during part of his reign as well. But he was also not like a complete traitor to his people. As we said, he had clear problems and had a huge ego problem, living like a Disney prince with people in such horrible conditions of poverty. But at the same time, in 1973, he did announce that his plan for Iran was that it was going to become the world's sixth industrial power in just one generation. So little did he know that was actually going to be a big issue. In 1960, OPEC was founded by the five oil-producing countries: Venezuela, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Kuwait, in an attempt for them to kind of join forces to have a bit more control over, the market price of oil, because obviously, it's a very precarious situation for these countries to be in, because there's all kinds of sabotage that can happen to fluctuate the market price, and it can totally devastate your economy if you're, again, so reliant on this one thing. So the OPEC was starting to have a voice, but there was the Seven Sisters, which controlled approximately 86% of the oil production in the OPEC countries. The Seven Sisters was the name for 7 transnational oil companies. And of course, British Petroleum owned 40% and Royal Dutch Shell owned 14%. So this gave Britain a majority ownership during this period. When 1973, with the sudden rise of oil prices, the Shah started to see this, idea for independent action, and he saw the price increase as a way to pull his country out of backwardness. And he again pledged that his plan for Iran by 2000 was that it was going to be in the top 10 industrial nations by 2000. So he understood at least the power of oil as not just being something that you trade to other countries who actually have industry and who are using it to make themselves wealthier, and Iran only having like maybe a few people who are wealthy. He understood that oil was actually, if Iran had the control over it, was going to be a huge game changer for Iran and would be what would allow it to have a massive industry and a boost for the standard of living for the people. So during this time in 1978, France and West Germany were also leading a kind of opposition to the British financial stranglehold, the City of London stranglehold, and they wanted to set up their own European monetary system. You could say kind of like in opposition to the IMF sort of control. And because again, like there was a lot of, economic loans and the conditions for these things were very much being controlled by a British colonial viewpoint in the world. And French Foreign Minister Jean-François Poncet had said at the UN press conference that his vision for the European monetary system was to explicitly replace the IMF and World Bank as the center of world finance. Again, the IMF and the World Bank were actually, supporters of keeping these countries down as a colonial status. African countries, for instance, they can't get loans without conditions. You can get money, but they actually tell you what you can spend the money on and what you cannot spend the money on. So there's been talk that, these African countries were actually denied to be able to spend the money on electrical grids, and these sorts of things, which sounds insane. But as we're going to see with this story, it doesn't sound so far-fetched if you know this history. In 1977, so France and West Germany started exploring the possibility of making deals with oil-producing countries where they would supply high-technology exports, including nuclear technology, to OPEC countries in exchange for long-term oil supply contracts. So this is at a stable price. This is a very, benevolent, this is a very good intentioned thing that now we see is happening more with China and Russia. That this is a beneficial exchange for both. France and West Germany need an oil supply, and the oil producing countries need high technology in order to help boost their industry. This was something that was never offered in the IMF World Bank system. So the
something by the way, Badlanders, that General Quast talks about all the time, that nuclear energy equals cheap, affordable energy, which is what is going to elevate lesser developed nations into something closer to a first world status and elevate the standard of living.
Yeah. So these OPEC countries started to deposit enormous, financial sums into these Western European banks that were set up with this European monetary system, where the British were explicitly not invited to participate because they knew that they were going to try to subvert it. So it was very clear, what they were trying to do here. The Carter administration had the nerve to send Vice President Walter Mondale to France and West Germany to inform them that the United States would oppose the sale of nuclear technology to the third world. This included selling nuclear technology to Brazil and to South Korea. So this is something people need to realize, right? Like all of this talk of like Iran just can't have this stuff. They can't have it. They can't have it. It's to keep Iran down. They even were saying no to Brazil and South Korea. Like it's very clear that this is a mode of control. It's not really a subject of national security. So the Shah,
it's a system of feudalism at the international level, where they're gonna be the king in the castle, and every other country are going to be the serfs out in the fields, tending to the fields, working the oil fields, bringing the energy back to the king so he can use it for his own benefit. But nobody else gets to have a castle or be the sovereign of their fiefdom.
Exactly. And so the Shah of Iran was actually moving to form a partnership with Iraq, Saudi Arabia. And this was obviously really important. And you'll see that the Khomeini revolution was largely also organized to mess this up. These countries aligning and working in tandem along with the European monetary system was going to be an unstoppable combination against the London World Financial Center.
Yeah.
And
I was just going to add one thing too. At that same time that's happening, these leaders of the EMS, the European Monetary System, so Italy, France, and Germany, are also working to assist the Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Iran trifecta that had set up in 1976 or 75 as three major oil producing nations that all wanted to industrialize at the exact same time. And the Shah, Saddam Hussein, and the leadership of 75, of Saudi Arabia all got together and said, we're going to create a block, and we're going to work with this massive bounty of capital, because oil prices had skyrocketed, right? So they have tons of money, and they're all going to not just do it to, like, they're going to all focus on this Japan model, South Korean model of frontier technological progress with a focus on nuclear, that these nations in Europe are saying, like you're just going through, are all saying, yeah, let's help you. Let's build nuclear reactors. And they're all doing this together until, well, you're going to get into that, but yeah.
Yeah, 75, that's when Faisal was assassinated.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Didn't want to jump ahead, but just wanted to point that out.
Mm-hmm.
No, actually, it's not jumping ahead at all. So in the Shah is organizing all of this. He seems to be kind of like spearheading it. And in 1976, November 1976, Amnesty International starts reporting charges of brutality and torture of political prisoners by the Shah of Iran. Of course, again, to create this, international criticism now of the Shah being this sort of thing. So again, Mossadegh, they spread lies that he was a Soviet Union's puppet, which was totally not true, because he wanted to nationalize the oil. The Shah starts talking about this stuff. Now all of a sudden there's humanitarian reports of him doing brutality and torture. This was happening under the Savak, which was the secret police under the Shah from, I now have the dates here in front of me in my paper, 1957 to 1979. So they began after Mossadegh's ouster, I think for obvious reasons. And the Savak was MI6 largely. And then you had, I would say, is the Israeli Mossad second, and then CIA influence. So
did you have any Muslim Brotherhood connections within the Savak too that you've noticed, or did you not pick up on that?
Well, the Muslim Brotherhood has ties with British intelligence, so I would not be surprised, but I don't know the details to that. But yeah, I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood were very much tied with British intelligence, so I would, it would make sense. So the Savak was created as a secret police. So the Savak is really what was doing brutality and torture of prisoners, and this was a foreign thing, right, that had been instituted and was run. Like the people who were trained within the Savak were trained by the Mossad. And the MI6 and the Mossad had basically control over this. So it's very ironic that Amnesty International reports humanitarian crises over this thing, and they're blaming the Shah, who's largely totally unaware of what the Savak is doing. He, again, like I said, he had his problems and his naivete. But they were blaming him for something that was an MI6 Mossad institution, essentially. And the timing of it was very clear. It was because the Shah was trying to organize this coalition with Saudi Arabia and Iraq for sovereignty around the oil for clearly the recognized benefit that this would uplift and create industry for these for the people. So what ends up happening, they target the Shah for this, and the British BBC starts also fanning the flames for there to be a revolt in the country, because the Shah was very silly and he defends the Sabak. Now, again, the Shah was not someone, there's no evidence that he was like really a part of that, and he trusted the Sabak too much, didn't realize what they were, and they were actually the ones who also largely screwed him over. But anyway, the people of Iran are living in poverty, right? The Shah is living in this like massive amount of wealth that is not justified, but they don't understand that he's actually in the middle of doing something that is in their interest. And like a lot of these, you know, the Maidan revolution or the Taiwan, you know, sunflower movement, they convince people to protest on economic matters that they don't even understand are to their benefit. And that happened totally in Iran. It was the absolute wrong time to be, you know, protesting against the Shah while he was in the midst of trying to organize these things. And the BBC was the one that was telling the Iranian people all of these horrendous things. So even the Iranian people were believing that this was in their best interest to do this. And also, you know, the 25-year contract was coming up with British Petroleum to renew their contract. So that was also
the consortium agreement of 1954, yeah, which is like basically the whole reason that they installed the Shah, right?
Yeah. And so there's definitely, you know, that aspect in there. And what do I want to say?
Well, did you want to talk about Shapur Bakhtiar as well? Like that, because I find that story is so. Like,
Yeah,
I didn't know. Oh, you will? Okay, I'll just shut up. Okay.
Well, so yeah, I mean, I don't think it's necessary to mention with you guys the Arc of Crisis, but it's, you know, it was officially the Arc of Crisis from Zbigniew Brzezinski was officially, you know, accepted by NATO in 1978, and it was largely to target, you know, Iran, and Egypt and Israel were expected to play a role in initiating expansion of NATO into Middle East, and so Iran was targeted first under this. And we're gonna talk about, you know, the Khomeini thing. It's hopefully coherent enough, like what I'm doing, but in 1979, the Shah. So during this like foment with the Iranian people who are getting like very upset over this, the Shah names Shapur Bakhtiar in January 4th, 1979 to try to help deal with the issue. So you can see that the Shah ultimately didn't disagree with Mossadegh, because Shapur Bakhtiar essentially does the things that Mossadegh was also like for. Bakhtiar was held in high regard by the French and Iranian nationalists. He didn't have a government for very long because there was the overthrow, but it's interesting to see that he did push through a series of major reform acts. He completely nationalized all British oil interest in Iran, so it became under Iran's control, put an end to martial law, abolished the Sabak, and pulled Iran out of the Central Treaty Organization, declaring that Iran would no longer be the gendarme of the Gulf. So again, the Shah had chosen Bakhtiar for that. So, you know, the fact that the Sabak was abolished shows that, you know, at the end of the day, the Shah did not consider that institution for him or for the Iranian people. Bakhtiar would be also announced that he would be removing Ardashir Zahedi from his position as Iran's ambassador to the United States. So this Ardashir Zahedi is actually the son of Fazlollah Zahedi, who was the man who was organized to replace Mossadegh during the Mossadegh coup. So you can see how there's like these foreign, you know, kind of people who have been bought, who it's like just a clear line, a connection of this foreign tampering in what's happening in the country. Again, with the Shah overthrow and all of this as well. So what do I want to say? Another really important point, Matt, that you can also show the Guardian article is that in February 1979, the number 2 in the NATO chain of command was General Robert Heuser, was in Iran and was in frequent contact with Brzezinski during this period. And it was thought, you can show it on the screen, it is thought that it was Heuser's job to avoid any coup attempts to disrupt the takeover by Khomeini's revolutionary forces by largely misleading the Iranian generals with false intel and U.S. promises. Recently declassified documents on Heuser's visit to Iran confirmed these suspicions, which the Guardian had gone over. So that should be very, weird for an American audience to receive. Like, why would the second in the NATO command be involved in supporting the Khomeini revolution against the Shah?
Mm-hmm.
I think the reasons should be clear. I think, Matt, you can go over the details later on as to like the whole Iran-Iraq war and how Khomeini was used and working with Israel in attacking nuclear facilities as well. Both countries end up destroying their own nuclear facilities. Like it's a
sick joke. It's a sick joke. Well, whenever you want me to say something on that, I'll share a thought.
People got so mixed up in the religious fervor or the religious fervor that they ended up destroying their own what ultimately they had originally been willing to work together to help each other on, which were matters of energy and sovereignty. So anyway, the Shah, he starts to have his health starts to deteriorate during this revolution, and Henry Kissinger is in very close contact with the Shah, and it seems that he's the one, along with Brzezinski, who encourages the Shah to come to the United States, even though it was known by every intelligence report that was going to lead to a disastrous outcome. Interestingly, in a New York Times article published in 1979, November 18th, 1979, they write, "The decision was made despite the fact that Mr. Carter and his senior policy advisors had known for months that to admit the Shah might endanger Americans at the embassy in Tehran. An aide reported that at one staff meeting, Mr. Carter had asked, 'When the Iranians take our people in Tehran hostage, what will you advise me then?'"
So yeah, the
New York Times reported that.
They had clear foreknowledge then that this because that's something that traumatized a lot of Americans, and even to this very day, a lot of Americans have a very negative view of Iran because of the hostage crisis that went on for like 444 days, and Hollywood movies have been made about it. But what you're implying here is that this whole thing was orchestrated by forces then controlling Jimmy Carter, who was even asking Kissinger, what do we do once it happens? What?
Namely Brzezinski and Kissinger. So when the Shah arrives in New York for medical treatment on October 22nd, 1979, 12 days later, the U.S. Embassy in Tehran is taken over with 52 American hostages and were held captive for 444 days. To remind people, none of the hostages there was no killing involved, but it was a totally predictable situation. So when these hostages were taken, the Carter administration had the excuse now to basically invoke the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, authorizing the President Carter, to regulate international commerce after declaring a national emergency in response to an extraordinary threat. So with this new authority, Carter froze all U.S. Iranian financial assets amounting to over $6 billion, including in branches of American banks abroad. The world financial markets were thrown into a panic. Big dollar depositors in Western Europe and the United States particularly the OPEC central banks, began to pull back from further commitments. The euro-dollar market was paralyzed, and most international lending halted under this freezing, which I think a lot of these funds have never been released back to Iran, if I understand correctly. So this scared away from long-term lending that was also going on between West Germany and France. That was the sabotage of not only the European monetary system, but this offer to trade in, high technology for oil. And later on, the European monetary system was hijacked and turned into something, totally different from what it was originally meant to be created under de Gaulle and Adenauer, which was in opposition to an IMF World Bank structure. Later on, it was incorporated into such a thing. So this had actually also hit Western Europe and Japan very heavily, these economic sanctions against Iran. So it wasn't just something that was keeping Iran down. It actually really sabotaged what Western Europe and Japan were trying to organize. Interestingly, in November 20th, 1979, in Le Figaro, which is a big newspaper in France, Paul-Marie de la Gorce, he said, who was in close dialogue with the French presidential palace, he had concluded that U.S. military and economic intervention into Iran would cause, quote, more damages for Europe and Japan than for Iran, end quote, and that advocates to such solutions are, quote, consciously or not inspired by the lessons given by Henry Kissinger, end quote. So that was, I think that's what I would mainly want to highlight, and then I'll maybe leave it to you guys to talk more about the Israel connection with Khomeini and the Iraq-Iran situation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cynthia. That was a lot. And I think a lot of people are going to want to revisit this entire composition. Plus, your articles again are going to be in the description box very shortly under this video. Or if people just go and look at your name right now beside your video, they'll see cynthiachung.substack.com. I saw your finger just lifting there as if you were going to say something.
Oh, I don't know if we want to just quickly bring up that Michael Stanton.
Oh, the Michael Stanton. You mean Anton? Oh,
Anton. Sorry.
Is that what you wanted me to bring up?
Yes.
Well, okay, but before we do that, yeah, I would say, there's. Yeah, so the thing that I think is also useful just to hold in mind is that during this time, like you alluded to it, but just to make it really visceral, both Iraq and Iran's nuclear research capabilities, they had civilian nuclear reactors, they had research reactors in both countries. The Soviets had helped Iraq build their 1966 reactor that was expanding because it was started as a scientific research reactor. But the idea was to always create a mass civilian nuclear energy capability. Now, by the time, the Soviets weren't in a position to really do that, they were getting dragged into their own Afghanistan war, that was part of this whole operation in 1978 to 1980, because that everything you're talking about is the arc of crisis. It's the CIA MI6 expansion of radicalizing, madrasas that would weaponize Islam, create an Islamist sort of movement that then manifested in various ways in different parts of the Arab world. And we know the story in Afghanistan. So the Soviets were getting a lot of their resources drawn into this wasting war there, as the basis of what then became ISIS, Al-Qaeda was growing, sponsored by Western intelligence. Same thing was going on in a different way, slightly different flavor in Iran. But Iraq was just like freaking out because, Saddam Hussein had a pro-technological progress type of orientation. His Ba'ath Party had called for a new economic architecture with the French and the Germans supporting him in the 70s. He had this great alliance with Saudi Arabia and Iran. So they had this idea of building nuclear reactors. Now, Iran had their own nuclear reactor too, the Bushehr, I can't pronounce it, reactor. And it's just so ironically interesting and sad that as soon as the Ayatollah is installed, one of the first things that they do is the Iranians and the Israelis, with the help and direction of the United States, goes and starts attacking the Iraqi nuclear energy reactor. Like, that's the first thing they're destroying is Saddam's nuclear reactor in these waves after waves of attacks. And there's all sorts of declassified information that's come to the surface, pointing out the Iranian jets were like leaving from Israeli territory to launch their attacks. And this is a high-level person inside of Israeli intelligence that gave this report a few years back. So you have that. And then starting in 1983, now Iraq starts attacking the Iranian nuclear reactors, which leads directly into the whole Iraq-Iran war that annihilates after maybe like 7 bombing campaigns. It annihilates the Iranian nuclear reactor, again made possible by Donald Rumsfeld, who goes and makes sure that Iraq is replete with weapons sold by all sorts of U.S. military industrial firms with the help of Israel as well. At the same time as you have Iran-Contra. At the same time as Iran-Contra is going down, $2 billion every single year of weapons are sold to Iran. Even after the U.S. starts sanctioning Iran as a terrorist state in 1984, they're still doing massive arms sales to Iran via Israel. That's just perpetuating this conflict, where two allies sitting right next to each other who have everything in common and everything to win by working together can do nothing but kill each other for years and years and years, leading up to effectively Desert Storm. It's mind-blowing.
One of the things I picked up from the Scott Horton interview with Tucker is the fact that we, the United States, sold Saddam the chemical weapons that he used against the Iranians during that war, that we then turned around in 2003 and said, this is the reason that we have to go invade Iraq in 2003 and overthrow Saddam. Because he has weapons of mass destruction, which were later, that statement was later proven to be untrue. But we justified it by saying, well, he doesn't have weapons of mass destruction, but he does have chemical weapons, and those are illegal under the Geneva Convention. So therefore, that justifies like taking him out. We gave him those weapons to go fight Iran in 1980. It blows my mind that that's what happened. Every person involved in that, Donald Rumsfeld down, should be thrown in Guantanamo Bay for the rest of their life. I mean, that is such an absurd revelation that I had that we gave Saddam those weapons. And it's an indictment of the entire U.S. government. It makes me think that the U.S. government is just an organized crime syndicate. And that's really how it's operated ever since Kennedy was taken out.
Right. Yeah. And the role of the Iraqi ambassador to the United States that was going around talking about like babies being massacred by the Iraqi government. Same source. I mean, that like it's just the amount of lies that we were being fed the entire way to give to cause us here in the West to give our consent to the most heinous atrocities and acts of genocide that have destroyed the lives of so many millions of innocent people, and it's still going on as an agenda. So it's really jarring. Now, maybe before we sort of phase out, I'm going to read the second ad from today's show, and then maybe we could say something about Rafsanjani and the awakening or the reawakening of a nationalist civilizational spirit that broke from the Ayatollah's sort of programming. Because in the early years, after the revolution, Iran was much more malleable, much more part of these geopolitical intrigues. And then something happened, which, I mean, obviously more work needs to be done, where a much more sane faction within Iran ended up becoming more and more of the pacemaker, for foreign policy and internal policy, which we should probably say a little something about, because that is how you end your trilogy. Is on the revival of the healthier Renaissance spirit of the Persian deep culture. But before that, let's listen to the second ad, which is our Patriot Store. This is a Badlands Media ad. Here we are. Okay, your Patriot Store is not just a shop; it is a movement, family owned. They are about faith, freedom, and unapologetic patriotism. You'll find curated gear, apparel, flags, morale patches, challenge coins, and custom designs that celebrate America, our troops, and traditional values. No woke nonsense, just truth, liberty, and grit. Your Patriot Store, supports veterans, first responders, and small American businesses while outfitting the silent majority with gear that speaks loudly. Fast shipping, honest service, and no gimmicks, just real gear for real patriots. Visit your Patriot Store at badlandsmedia.tv/Patriot Store for 20% off of your entire order. No code required. That's badlandsmedia.tv/Patriot Store. All right. There we go. Patriot Store. We lost Ghost. We lost Gordon. That's okay. He'll come back.
I'm here.
There he is. All right.
So real quick before we continue, I think it's worth pointing out that 1980, and I apologize if I'm stepping on your toes at all, Cynthia, but you mentioned the Ark of Crisis, which was like this concept created by Zbigniew Brzezinski about containing that whole area from Iran, Iraq, that whole little stretch of the Middle East. And that leads to the Carter Doctrine of 1980, which effectively, after the Soviets invade Afghanistan, let me pull up a map. The Soviets invade Afghanistan in 1979 after the Shah is overthrown. And then, let's see, and then we implement the Carter Doctrine, which kind of comes to define the Middle East in a lot of ways, because share my screen. Okay, so just to give everyone your bearings, we're talking about Iran and Afghanistan. So, at this stage, Afghanistan gets invaded in 1979. The Shah is overthrown in Iran in 1979. And the Ark of Crisis concept is introduced by Zbigniew Brzezinski, which then leads to the Carter Doctrine in 1980. The Carter Doctrine effectively says that, as Scott Horton put it with Tucker, it turns the Persian Gulf into a lake and says anyone who encroaches on this lake is threatening U.S. national security and will be treated as an enemy of the United States, speaking directly to Russia. That dynamic that's established by the Carter Doctrine sets up Operation Cyclone, which was the operation where Zbigniew Brzezinski recruits a Saudi national named Osama bin Laden to summon all of these radicalized fighters across the world to come to Afghanistan to fight the Soviets. In exchange, we're going to build them schools to educate their children. Those madrasas, those schools, are then used to radicalize their children. And the students from those schools, along with the mujahideen that we trained in Afghanistan to fight the Soviets, create what's later called Al-Qaeda in 1988, our creation, the U.S. government's creation. But all of that is tied to 1979 when the Shah's overthrown and when the Soviets invade Afghanistan, because the people in power, the regime, is worried about their monopoly over the oil in the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, and the entire, like, we take it for granted because so many of us, our entire lives, we've only known U.S. military bases occupying the Middle East and the Indian Ocean. But it's like that was not always the case. All of that was justified. That massive expansion of U.S. military presence into the entire Middle East region and the Indian Ocean was all the outgrowth of this Carter Doctrine. That's what allowed us to get in there as well. And then we're like, oh, well, it'll just be temporary, just till the crisis is over. It's like, no, no, that's never how it works.
Exactly.
Yeah. The other, sorry, go on, Cynthia.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to sort of shift and just bring up also the shadow government apparatus. I was just reading a report on Iran-Contra and how the entirety of Iran-Contra was used by figures around Rumsfeld. These Straussians are all over the place because they were all brought in by Zbigniew Brzezinski under Carter originally. So you had all of these Richard Pearl, all of these Straussian followers of this really creepy Frankfurt School Gnostic figure, this high-level social engineer, Leo Strauss, who trained multi-generations of wannabe elites, Peter Thiel being one self-professed Straussian amongst many, who was trained by Richard Pearl at Stanford, as well as Opus Dei, which is another thing. But you know, these guys, like one figure was John Poindexter, who is I think the national security director under Reagan, who was overseeing the Iran-Contra. He ended up going to jail for a little bit because it was all illegal. But they built up this massive shadow government apparatus, this parallel government agency during Iran-Contra, where they were also, you know, supplying all sorts of financial support to the Contras to start overthrowing governments that they didn't like in Latin America, Nicaragua, Venezuela, but mostly Nicaragua. Then it spread all across Latin America. It was tied into what you've already written about, the Operation Condor machinery that was built up after Vietnam in South America. Totally tied into that. That also seems to have a lot of Nazis everywhere you look. Like, it's the Gladio operation, because everywhere you look, you got Nazis. First, second, third generation Nazis that are employed as part of this global shadow government apparatus of paramilitary organizations that tie directly into this weird satanic faction that was infiltrating the US military. And they were such a small fringe thing, but somehow during this 1980s period, they ended up creating these mechanisms that had huge disproportionate influence. It was crazy. That led into the forever wars, the new crusader agencies that really took over with George Bush and Dick Cheney in 9/11, that we're still suffering from to this very day, you know. And it's even we're seeing a lot of efforts that Gordon and I, we've talked about this, by this agency to try to recapture the MAGA movement, this anti-imperial patriot movement in America. They're trying to do everything possible to recapture and redirect the force of the patriots into a new type of flavor of the exact same poison. So it's something really to have in mind, the continuity of this thing, because John Poindexter, who ran the Iran-Contra during this time, was a big key figure. This guy got a new job right as soon as he got out of jail in setting up the total information awareness operation under Dick Cheney. That was, you know, that thing with the pyramid with the eye agency in 2003 to try to create like a surveillance grid of every human being in America, as well as international. That same thing is what Poindexter set up. And when the population rejected it, because they were like, we're not ready to just give up all of our our privacy and freedom for this thing, that's when he worked with I think it was Richard Pearl to create what became known as Palantir in 2004, to basically give it a civilian veneer, but to do the exact same thing that they. Yeah, so it's like, this is really important stuff to keep that continuity going in mind.
Yeah, I mean, this whole maneuver to constantly do regime changes, I mean, no country should have the right to kind of dictate terms like that on a global scale and tell countries to do a regime change because they're not happy with their leadership. But we see the outcome of these regime changes that are done under the guise of national security, and it's always the exact opposite. It increases instability in the region, and it actually increases the threat to not only the countries in the area, but to the best interests of the United States. You know, like, so again, as Gordon was bringing up, Al-Qaeda is a creation of a certain sector within the United States. So, you know, we create the monsters that we then justify we have to go into to like bomb countries to destroy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really awful setup. Anyway, so Rafsanjani, which you want to talk about a bit, he was the president of Iran from 1989 to 1997. And he seems to be more genuine than Khomeini. He's one of the founding fathers of the Islamic Republic. And when the Soviet Union broke apart in 1991, there was an opening for him to start establishing diplomatic relations in the Central Asian republics. And there was a lot of focus on economic cooperation and the building of infrastructure. So again, very similar to what China and Russia and Iran are working towards today. There was the opening of the, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce this properly, the Mashhad Sarak Tajan Railway, which was a huge one that was the missing link in the network connecting landlocked Central Asian republics and again connecting them to the Persian Gulf ports. Rafsanjani had said that these types of infrastructure projects and which were going to have access to world markets would enhance amity, confidence, and trust amongst governments and lead to mutual understanding and greater solidarity. The recent global developments demonstrate the world is moving toward greater regional cooperation and regionally coordinated economic growth and development will consolidate peace and stability and pave the way for enhancement of international relations. So this is like well before China started the Belt and Road Initiative, and you can see that they were already very much in line with this. In 1997, there was the 125-mile pipeline between Turkmenistan and northeast Iran, which opened, which gained access to one of the largest untapped energy reserves in the world, the Caspian Sea Basin. So he was aware, Rafsanjani was aware of the arc of crisis, and he understood that it was economic development that was going to be the best counteraction and enhancement of stability. Actually, you know, the arc of crisis is meant because this was always a natural thing. If you look at it, like this is the natural condition of people and countries. There's a small grouping that is constantly introducing a chaos factor into these types of things, including, you know, the funding of terrorism, which is meant to undo these projects. Like right now, the Belt and Road Initiative, one of the reasons why there's so much secrecy over certain areas is because there have been so many terrorist attacks on these development projects. Like you see where these ISIS is attacking historical sites. They're attacking, you know, these civilizational historical sites to clearly try to like erase civilizational history, which is also really important for people to have that kind of reference point. It's harder to reduce them to a state of like barbarism if they have this like, you know, really proud history of good accomplishments that they've had. And then on top of it, they attack development projects. Like it's totally a controlled thing that's working for, you know, the worst parts of an Anglo-American institution. What's also interesting is Rafsanjani then calls for support for Khatami as the next president, and Mohammad Khatami became president of Iran from 1997 to 2005, and he was really popular with the younger generation and women as well. And he continued this very strong movement of Iran towards economic advances, international relations.
Well, yeah. And that was one of the it was at that time that you had the International North-South Transportation Corridor that was established with Iran, India, and Russia in 2000. You also had the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which Iran later on joined, but definitely, I mean, the idea of incorporating Iran, because it was at that time that Zbigniew Brzezinski had also just said in 1998 that the only thing that could threaten the possibility of our new world order would be some statistically improbable but possible cooperation between Russia, China, and Iran. And so I think that people within those three countries were listening very closely to what Zbigniew was actually saying and saying, well, okay, well, if our enemy is afraid of something, we should probably do that.
Yeah, and I mean, like all three of those countries, they've gone through revolutions that had some foreign influence, but they've been able to move in a direction that has really worked for their sovereignty. And it's not a coincidence that these three countries are very long historical civilizational nations that very much are connected to that history, and they take it very seriously, their civilizational legacy. And Khatami would be the first to propose the concept of dialogue amongst civilizations, which I think is a wonderful concept. That is exactly what ISIS is trying to attack in the Middle East. And he proposed this to the UN General Assembly in 1998. and it was endorsed by the United Nations. And it was obviously a response to the clash of civilizations, the crisis of Islam type geopolitical theories that were being pushed by Bernard Lewis and Samuel Huntington, the arc of crisis type of justification of why America would have to fight forever wars in the Middle East. He was also doing a lot of diplomatic relations with China too, in terms of infrastructure projects. So it was already like very early on. Italy was actually the first in Europe to sign to the Belt and Road Initiative in Europe. And in 1999, Khatami would be the first Iranian president since the Iranian Revolution to visit Europe. And he went to Italy first and met with Pope John Paul II. And they had a very good meeting there in terms of how Christianity and Islam would have a common mission in terms of just prosperity and peace. And people should be reminded too that Syria, it's very unfortunate what happened to Syria, because it was known as the cradle of civilization, and you had like very old civilizations that were diversified. You had a representation of like Christianity and Islam that were coexisting for centuries peacefully in this area. So this idea that they have to be at odds with each other is totally not true. Syria was a very good example of why that was not the case. And so Khatami had said in an interview published in La Repubblica, his concept of a bridge between Islam and Christianity. He said, "To delve into past history without looking at the future can only be an academic diversion. To help human societies and improve the condition of the world, it is necessary to consider the present state of relations between Asian and in particular Muslim countries and Europe. Why do we say in particular Muslim? Because Islam is Europe's next door neighbor. Unlike individuals, nations are not free to choose or change neighbors. Therefore, apart from moral, cultural, and human reasons, out of historical and geographical necessity, Islam and Europe have no choice but to gain a better and more accurate understanding of each other, and thus to improve their political, economic, and cultural relations. Our future cannot be separated from each other because it is impossible to separate our past." And I'll just share one more quote and then we can, end it. Or in June 2000, Khatami made a state visit to China. Can you hear me? Because it's getting a little bit loud outside.
I can hear you. There's a little noise in the background, but it's not very noticeable.
Okay. In June 2000, Khatami made a state visit to China with a 170-member delegation. In a lecture delivered at the Beijing University, Khatami stated, "Even if one were to rely solely on historical documents, we can still demonstrate the existence of uninterrupted historical links between China and Iran as early as the 3rd century," referring to the Silk Road. "We can observe a striking spectrum of cultural and spiritual interchanges involving religions, customs, thoughts, literature, and ethics, which on the whole added to the vitality and vivacity of Eastern culture and thought. The Chinese outlook has been instrumental in opening up the way to the fruitful and constructive historical discourses throughout the ages, due to its emphasis on the intellectual over the political in an attempt to epitomize wisdom, temperance, and parsimony. Emphasis on our long-standing close historical ties and dialogue among the great Asian civilizations is a valuable instrument for the regenerating of thought, culture, language, and learning. In Asian civilizations, culture has always been the core of the economic and political process. Therefore, we are compelled to give a more serious thought to the revival of our cultures." And I'll just end it there that, the Middle East was named by the British Empire. And, really the Middle East is part of Asia. And, this idea to kind of move away from that kind of colonial reference point is not a bad thing. Khatami had concluded, "The future belongs to the cultured, wise, courageous, and industrious nations." So this was a prime minister of Iran from 1997 to 2005. So, this concept of what Iran is has been, not very accurate in terms of very clear, public statements and, very honest offerings of economic partnership have been done. The president of Iran, when he was interviewed by Tucker Carlson, made it the point: have the Iranians ever harmed anyone? Like, have the Iranians been caught actually doing anything so nefarious that there's this constant, need for them to prove that their hands are like, in the right places and this sort of thing? Like, it's really unfortunate, and this lack of respect for the Iranian people and what they've been going through in terms of constant attacks. They've had so many of their people, political leaders, military leaders, and scientists assassinated. And it's like we're all waiting for them to do some kind of reaction and then blame them for a reaction that would be in self-defense.
Yeah, that's so true. That's exactly how they're treated. And a lot of it just goes back to the fact that that Iran is the only land bridge aside from Russia between Africa, or I'm sorry, Asia and Europe / Africa. The only way you can get there by land is through Iran, unless you want to go through Russia. And I think there's a thing called the Iran crisis of 1946. It's considered the first conflict of the Cold War, and that was when I think it was. Let me pull up the Wikipedia just to make sure I get this right. It says. Sparked by the refusal of Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union to relinquish occupied Iranian territory despite repeated assurances. And the end of World War II should have resulted in the end of the Allied joint occupation of Iran. Instead, pro-Soviet Iranians proclaimed the separatist Azerbaijani People's Government and the Kurdish separatist Republic of Mahabad, which is Kurdistan. The U.S. pressure on the Soviet Union to withdraw is the earliest evidence of success of what would become the new strategy of the Truman Doctrine and containment. And the justification, it says down here, is they justified the invasion. The British and the Soviets justified their invasion of Iran as a gateway for delivery of Lend-Lease supplies from the Soviet Union to the Soviet Union from British India between 1941 and 1945. So the formal justification for why both the Soviets and the British occupied Iran during World War II was so that they could use the land bridge to send supplies from India, which was a very well supplied proxy state of Britain, to Russia to fight the Germans. And then, of course, like Matt said before, they always say it's going to be a temporary thing, and it never is. Just like when Israel went into Lebanon in 1981 to help them get rid of Yasser Arafat, and then didn't leave for 18 years. So it's the same thing over and over again. I do have a question, because that was a fascinating history, and a lot of it I actually did not know. But so, do you think, Cynthia, and it was in the 90s? Like, when do you think Iran broke away from whatever influence may? I mean, not to say that maybe it hasn't broken away, because we get the Mossad director David Barnea openly bragging that Mossad has infiltrated like every level of their government and is ready to overthrow and install their guy whenever, which may or may not be true. But do you think that, considering that the Ayatollah seemed to be in league with Israel and the U.S., was there like a fracturing of that relationship in the 90s, aside from Yitzhak Rabin's desire to create a new boogeyman so he could focus on the two-state solution with Palestine?
I think that, I think looking at how Rafsanjani decided to, open up after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, because like with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the whole Cold War narrative was really used to threaten so many countries that were not powerful enough to dictate their own terms. And you had the NSC 75, which Britain had convinced under Truman that it was the United States' best interest to protect British colonial interests after World War II in order to combat Soviet communism. So countries who thought that they were going to be freed from colonialism after World War II, because for a large part of the world, including the Middle East, right, it was a fight for also freedom of colonialism. That's how a lot of the Asian countries, including Middle East, the African countries, were viewing the fight of World War II. You have Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, who says it very explicitly for the Declaration of Independence of Vietnam, citing the American Declaration of Independence and saying that people who have been fighting French colonialism and the Japanese fascists deserve to be a free people. So when the Cold War narrative was ended, and a lot of leaders were assassinated under the justification of the Cold War narrative, which was not true, that they were somehow like, Soviet puppets, just like they said with Mossadegh. And it wasn't true. It's just that they were not playing by the Anglo-American rules of the game. And so it was used as an excuse to have regime changes continuously. So I think Rafsanjani was sensitive to this, and once the Soviet Union was dissolved, that threat was clearly not going to be there anymore, and it was a real opportunity to move fast in now opening up and having dialogues with other countries, because that was the other problem with the Cold War narrative, is that it was containing everyone, that they were not allowed to speak to others, they were not allowed to have big projects that again were not directly okayed by Anglo-America. So the fact that he moved into that so quickly, I think shows that he was of a better kind than Khomeini. Obviously, Iran does have fifth columnists. There's an idea to revive and bring back, the position of the Shah.
The Shah's son, yeah. Who's been like living in a DC suburb since 1979, like a $15 million mansion that he put up for sale last year and he sold last year. So
he must have
now he's coming out and like, hey, I'm ready to return. Are y'all ready to install me, Mossad?
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to mention quickly too, in Vietnam, right? They had the Emperor of Vietnam. He like lived in the Riviera, like he did not live in Vietnam, and he was living in the lap of luxury. And like, of course, the people are not going to respect that. I mean, the Iranians would be very foolish to accept someone who's been living in such luxury in a foreign country that has had a very bad historical relationship with their country.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the Iranians don't even know about this history. I don't know. There was something I wanted to quickly mention as well that I forgot. Bush Jr., he does a tour of the Middle East to try to also kind of gather this, to try to get other countries, especially Saudi Arabia, to start having a provocative stance with Iran. And he's trying to create clear division, and it's not very subtle, it's not very smooth. And the Al Riyadh newspaper of Saudi Arabia, which is pretty much the voice of the Saudi government, had stated at the time, "We refuse to be used to launch wars or tensions with Iran. If the president of the United States wants to obtain the solidarity of all the Arabs, he must focus rationally on the most important issue, which is the question of peace," which I just love that quote. And for people to also be aware that Bush Jr. was basically moving for a US dominated nuclear suppliers group, so that all nations would be permitted to purchase power plants to fuel from these supplier countries, would have to be okayed by this US dominated nuclear suppliers group. And obviously there would be political strings attached to this. So that was one of the other things of him coming in. And, Dick Cheney, it's no secret that he was pushing hard for an Iran invasion. And it was only when he had to go in for emergency heart surgery that you had a section of, was it the National Intelligence Estimates, who came out, they spoke to journalists saying there's no evidence that Iran has weapons of mass destruction. But Cheney had like such a hold on things that they felt they could only do it when he had to go in for emergency heart surgery. So yeah, I think it should be clear to people that this whole maneuver to keep these countries divided, it's not helping anyone. I mean, we could really have such a beautiful situation of prosperity and harmony, and having other countries do well. Like, this is another thing. This zero-sum game theory is such bullshit, right? Like, we've been brainwashed to think if another country's doing well, they have to be a threat. We have to be the ones dictating all terms. Like, how ridiculous. I don't know how, like, Western people seem to go along with this, or they're a little bit too soft on the fact that we have been telling other countries how to manage themselves, which has clearly been full of, like, really nefarious intentions to actually keep people divided in permanent war. There are sections that are a part of the military government in the Western infrastructure who have a crazy fanatical view, the neocon view of forever wars. And this isn't the natural condition for the Middle East. There could be this, like, really beautiful harmony, and we can have benefits from trading with these countries. Like, we can benefit from having more countries to trade with. It's going to actually create more wealth for us as well. As France and Germany were recognizing in trading, high nuclear technology for oil, that was the right idea.
Yeah, and today, like, Russia has offered Iran to build, and they're in the middle of building already, but 8 civilian nuclear reactors have been offered by Russia. They said they're going to foot the bill. They'll supply the tech. They'll even process Iran's nuclear spent fuel that they can then return back to Iran for civilian use. So Russia's doing it in the right way. And yeah, they have all sorts of, they're not just doing it as angels. They have obviously common sense business arrangements. They'll get stuff out of it too. But that's just good business. Don't kill your customers. China is looking at Iran and they had a $400 billion 25-year strategic partnership on energy, transport, security, full spectrum, similar type of thing as Russia did. 25 years, massive deal. And it's not being angelically utopian to say that you can have a world where people are working together without going to war. That it's unfortunate that we've watched so many dark dystopic movies and we've been so jaded by crap textbooks that have convinced us that human nature is just this pox, this Hobbesian animalistic sort of thing that can only be selfish and look out for itself at the expense of others. And it's like, no, looking out for yourself is looking out for others. All sane, mature human beings act and live that way with their family, with their neighborhood. So why, at the best of times, that's what humanity has always done internationally, is we look to our neighbors who might have a different religion, different skin color. And we're like, well, what makes us human first? And let's start creating policy based on that human quality first and foremost, and go from there, and then respect the differences that we have and even cherish those differences that we have without a fight or flight thing.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was going to just say too, like the remarks made by was it David Bernea? You said
Bernea,
that Mossad has infiltrated fifth columnists throughout the Iranian government. That is a high concern for me too, because the big thing that really disturbs me amidst this whole 12-day war, and really, since I would say the murder of Raisi, the former president and defense minister who got murdered, I would say assassinated in their helicopter over a year ago.
And the foreign minister, yeah.
And the foreign minister, yeah. So that was a huge that was big. That was a big coup. That I would say coup. I would say I don't fully trust, even though I like what Pezeshkian said in his interview with Tucker. Everything he said was good. But the fact that he came in such mysterious circumstances that involved the murder of a very reliable, consistent head of state is bothersome to me. And then in the 12-day so-called war, as much as we saw that there was some kabuki theater and planning, there was also a massive crippling of some of the most experienced figures in Iran's military. It was a big list of high-level people who had decades and decades of insight and experience on top of nuclear scientists who had been assassinated for many, many years before that. But it was a huge decapitation of a big chunk of qualified leadership within Iran. So it's nice to see. Like, I mean, I get some satisfaction, to be honest, that, you know, Iran got some nice punches in, demonstrated the power of hypersonic missiles, the incompetence of Israeli defenses, you know, and things like that. But at the same time, it's like, that's bad. And so what exactly are these? Are there closet royalists, right? That's a question I have. Are there closet royalists embedded within the Iranian bureaucracy, within the Iranian government, their deep state? What about, and we know that these royalists tied to the supporters of the Shah are very closely aligned with Mossad, with Israeli intelligence. As you just made the point, the guy's been living in luxury for 40 plus years. What is that? Do we have any Gorbachevs who act like patriots in the 80s when Gorbachev got power to speak to a patriotic sensibility of Russia, but only with the intention of destroying Russia from the inside and unplugging it, which is what he did in 1991? Is there something similar going on in Iran on that level? What about, and I would ask, I'm just throwing this out there as a question I don't have the answer to, but something just for people to think about and maybe for us to pull on as time goes by. What about the Baha'i movement? Right, we know that that's a British synthetic cult creation in the 19th century. I know it's tied to Israeli intelligence too. I saw somebody in the comments even making the point that the Baha'i played a key role in setting up Israel as a state. What about them? What about the Ismailis? The modern assassin movement of the Aga Khan, who, you know, Aga Khan 4 died a few months ago. Now you have the Aga Khan 5. We have insiders within that organization which have, you know, defected and made the point that on the esoteric inner teachings within that order, there is the belief that the Aga Khan is the avatar of Allah and Vishnu. Like, you've got something weird on the inside of this entity that was tied to the Templars going back 1,000 years when they were called the Assassins, this organized secret society of Islamic mercenaries, but they were actually not really Islamic at all. They had another esoteric inner teaching that worked with the Templars in order to do some, well, basically the Crusades. And they had a whole idea of Solomon's temple being rebuilt that also as part of their eschatology was the reconstruction of Solomon's temple as something that would trigger some new age cataclysm and rewire humankind into something that would be more in conformity with a feudal slave society under a master class of high priests. So things like that are in my mind, and I'm hoping that as I'm saying these words, people listening might also be able to pull on threads and actually get a better picture of some of what might be shaping the danger side of the deep state in Iran that could be interfacing with bad forces that have been doing so much damage to Iran from the 1870s onwards. So just throwing that out there.
Did you know that the current foreign minister, and I have no idea what to make of this, I'm not like making accusations, but the current foreign minister of Iran, Arakchi, did you know his nephew was the vice governor of the Central Bank of Iran and was arrested in August 2018 by Rouhani for corruption that I believe was related to the Obama nuclear deal? Because the nuclear deal, I think, was really just about money laundering. I think they were just laundering a bunch of money through the Iranian central bank, and him along with several others were arrested by Rouhani in August of 2018. And coincidentally, that exact same day, or like that exact same, I think it was the day before, Trump like reimposed the sanctions on Iran. That, because remember, he pulls out of the deal in May of 2018, and then he waited until August, like the first week of August, to reimpose these sanctions on Iran. And that same exact week, Arachi's nephew, Arachi, I think at the time was like a member of Congress, like a member of their legislature, or he was like an MK, and then he gets arrested, and a bunch of other guys in their central bank get arrested. It's like, I don't know what to make of it, but it's very interesting that the guy who's the foreign minister now, his nephew gets arrested as one of the top guys of their central bank connected to purportedly, allegedly, the money laundering that Obama and those people were all involved in. So I have no idea, but
very useful. Very useful.
To Cynthia's point, though, like what we've all been conditioned for is a zero-sum equation where one side loses, one side wins. In order for one side to be wealthy and powerful, and the other side has to be impoverished and poor and live as a slave. And that is, of course, nonsense. That's not at all how human capital works. And one of the reasons that I think the suppression of the nuclear technologies has occurred is to prevent that, to prevent the golden age from coming, this age of actual abundance, not this artificial abundance that we've experienced in America since the end of World War II. And frankly, to answer your question, why do Americans accept this? I don't think Americans necessarily accept it. I think they're pacified through bread and circus, distracted with their daily life. The people who do become invested in it, if they actually have access to like the right information like we do, I think ultimately do land where we are, even if they come from different backgrounds. Or they fall into these little information ghettos where they're listening to, like whoever, like not even MSN, like NBC, but also the Con Inc. Republican Party that is telling them that if you even sympathize, like right now they're accusing Tucker Carlson of being like a devil worshipping Nazi because he spoke to the Iranian president, because Jesus Christ in the Bible, we all know that Jesus in the Bible said, if you're not sending missiles to Israel every single day, you are not properly serving God. And that's what, these sycophants in the Republican Party believe, but they're all just a bunch of perverts. And it's really sick, man. The whole thing with Israel is disgusting. And I think that I'm really happy with what I'm seeing happen in terms of the exposure. It's really sad that the story that's being told, but I don't think it's a coincidence that the entire movement of people who are invested in this stuff, not the people who are uninvested, and I know plenty of those people, but who are invested, are all coming to the conclusion that Israel is at the core of all these problems in the Middle East and has to be dealt with. And right now, Netanyahu's at the White House trying to convince Trump to erase Palestine from the map and make it part of Israel. He's been there this is day 3 and no headline yet, so I don't think it's going to happen, but that's what he's there to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well said. I think that's probably a perfectly good place to wrap today's show up. We're rounding the 2-hour mark. I think I would like to play a little 1-minute video from sometimes you could talk philosophically about like something till the ends of the earth and to bring about all sorts of abstract details, but sometimes just to like see a direct video with your senses is a great way to blow a million words of slander out of the water. And Iran, the tyrannical mullah run, fundamentalist dictatorship that suffocates women and has no freedom. I mean, this is just a 1-minute clip randomly taken by an Iranian walking on an Iranian subway station. I just like this. Let's just compare this to like a subway experience in, let's say, New York City, and imagine, just hold that in mind as we look at this little tour of a train in Tehran.
It's amazing. Yeah. Cleaner than a lot of the subways I saw in Paris. Like, in Paris has decent subways compared to America. I wouldn't even go down the subway in America. But
now without a gas mask, yeah.
yeah. It's like the underworld there. But yeah, that's pretty awesome. Yeah. Let's hit these rants. And we can wrap up. I know we have some boosts. So let me just make sure we don't have any rants. Okay, so the boosts, we do have a few. So Badlands Boost, badlandsmedia.tv, and then click on the support tab. Scowin S3, $50. Thank you so much, Scowin. I cannot support you both enough. This is from yesterday. To show my appreciation for your wealth of knowledge that you share and explain. Episode 103 about the debt trap explains so many things that I have pondered. Thank you, Gordon and Matt. I think that was last week's show. That it's kind of weird. Like you made like an offhanded comment about like a tariff or like something about the economy, and that just led to like the entire show just being about discussing the economy, which I hadn't even like prepared for. You were telling me something in real time that I hadn't heard, and I was just like reacting to it, and then it just turned into like an hour and a half discussion about the economy. But it was good.
Yeah,
great.
It was fun. Yeah, I think I mentioned something about the big beautiful bill or something, and that just unleashed this whole conversation about
it triggered me because I have not been tracking the big beautiful bill thing because I just have no patience for Congress. I hate Congress more than just about anything there is out there. So I have no patience for any of them. But man, Rivermo, I think I might be saying that right. 2021. $10. Thank you goes to Matt. I always appreciate a different perspective. Great show. Rivermo, Missouri. Okay. RVer, Missouri. I think that's what it's supposed to be. Like you are in an RV. Fantastic. Well, thank you all for your support.
Yeah.
Yep. And we'll make sure that we had one rant come in from D-Dale DD. $5. Lovely guest. Great show later all. I would agree with all that. And thank you, Cynthia, for coming on and explaining Iran to us from a perspective that I hadn't heard before. Some of the things were familiar, but to hear the continuity through the whole 20th century, I think was very enlightening. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Cynthia. That was great. So everybody go subscribe to Cynthia Chung's Substack right now. It's right there on the screen. It's going to be in the description box or in the comment section very soon. So do that today. Let's listen to one ad for announcing GART, the upcoming GART in Deadwood. Then we'll end today's show. So here it is. GART in Deadwood in August is coming on. So get out your agendas.
Coming August 14th to 17th, Badlands Media returns to Deadwood, South Dakota for the 9th stop of the Great American Restoration Tour. Come for family, friends, fun, and a fucking good time. Hear truth bombs that hit harder than B2s on an Iran nuke site from Burning Bright, Chris Paul, CanCon, Red Pill 78, Brad Nabby, Ash, Ghost, Jordan Sather, John Harold, whoever that is, and more. Plus, Alpha might make you a sandwich. Deadwood is a gorgeous town in the middle of the Black Hills of South Dakota. If you've never been, you need to see it. Plus, you might be lucky enough to witness some terrible karaoke from your favorite Badlanders. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/events for weekend or one-day tickets. And if you can't make it in person, virtual tickets are available too. Watch from the comfort of your couch with tons of behind-the-scenes content and get access to an exclusive GART chat. That's badlandsmedia.tv/events. Be there or be there online. It'll be recorded.
I've never heard Jordan's World Wrestling Federation announcer voice. That was a new thing for me.
It was good, right?
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, well, look forward to seeing you there. Cynthia, hopefully you can join us if you're free. Deadwood was a lot of fun last year.
Yeah. I mean, it would be great to meet you in person and the rest of the group. And again, thanks so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure. And I am a big fan of your show. I'm not just saying that. I think you guys do really great work. It's really impressive.
Well, we appreciate that. And you certainly supplement us because that was a great in-depth dive. And I would encourage, I'm going to post all the 3 links to the articles that you were drawing the information from, because those are very well researched and sourced. So everyone, please go into the comments after you watch this, and you will see the links to those. And obviously subscribe to her Substack.
Yep. All right. Thanks, guys. Till next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.